For a long time, the first job was not supposed to be glamorous. You did the basic stuff. You wrote the first draft, you cleaned up the spreadsheet, you handled the simple ticket. You sat in the meeting and mostly listened. You made mistakes while the stakes were still low. And slowly, almost without noticing it, you started to become useful.
That first rung mattered because it did more than produce output. It turned potential into judgment. It gave beginners a place to practice, absorb standards, watch senior people think, receive correction, and learn what good work actually looks like. And that is why this episode is not simply about whether AI will take entry-level jobs. That framing is too narrow. The deeper question is whether AI will absorb the work that used to help people become professionally valuable in the first place.
Right. Because a lot of the early work was boring, honestly. But it wasn't pointless. It was how people learned the job.
The first rung was low for a reason. It gave people somewhere to start. A junior lawyer learned through document review and first-pass research. A junior developer learned through small tickets, bug fixes, tests, and code cleanup. A junior analyst learned through spreadsheets, research summaries, and slide drafts. A junior marketer learned through captions, headlines, content variations, and first drafts. None of that work was the final destination. But it was formative. It trained attention, it built taste, it taught pattern recognition. It created the repetitions that eventually became judgment.
And now the tension is that a lot of those exact tasks are the ones AI is getting pretty good at helping with. Or in some cases, doing.
Drafting, summarizing, researching, comparing documents, generating code, creating variants, cleaning data, preparing outlines, responding to routine questions. These are precisely the kinds of first-pass tasks that often sat near the bottom of the white-collar ladder. AI does not have to replace an entire profession to change the pathway into that profession. It only has to compress enough of the beginner work that companies start asking whether they need as many beginners doing it.
That's the part that feels different from the usual job loss conversation. This isn't just, will there be jobs? It's more like, will there still be a way in?
That is the emotional center. Young workers are not only asking whether jobs exist, they are asking whether the path into competence still exists. And the early data gives that concern some weight. Dallas Fed coverage of Stanford-linked research found that young workers in highly AI-exposed occupations have experienced meaningful employment pressure since 2022, while less exposed and more experienced workers have been steadier. The San Francisco Fed's republication of that work adds an important nuance. The decline appears to be driven less by mass layoffs and more by fewer young people transitioning directly into employment in AI-exposed occupations. That matters because the first sign of disruption may not be people getting pushed out. It may be new people struggling to get in.
That's actually more unsettling in a quiet way, because if the job never appears, no one gets a layoff notice. The door just doesn't open.
And that's why this episode has to be precise. We are not saying AI alone explains the entire entry-level labour market. It does not. The recent graduate labour market has already been difficult. New York Fed data tracks elevated unemployment and underemployment among recent college graduates, and other forces are clearly involved. Higher interest rates, slower hiring, remote work onboarding challenges, post-pandemic overhiring corrections, and weaker white-collar demand in some sectors. But AI arrives inside that already stressed environment and changes the cost-benefit calculation of hiring beginners.
So even if AI is not the only cause, it can still make the first rung feel less stable.
No, and we should be very clear about that. Some junior work was exploitative, some of it was gatekeeping, some of it wasted people's time under the excuse of paying dues. The point is not to preserve pointless suffering or inefficient rituals. The point is to preserve formation. If AI removes the low-value version of the task, that can be good. But then leaders have to design a better learning pathway. They cannot simply say, AI can do the task, so no beginner needs to learn through it. That is the leap that becomes dangerous.
And that creates a weird expectation. You're supposed to be entry-level, but also somehow already AI ready.
The first job used to teach you how work works. Now some companies may expect you to arrive already amplified. That creates a difficult gap for students, recent graduates, and young workers. They are told AI skills matter, but many feel their education has not fully integrated those tools. They are told AI will make them more capable, but they can see that the same tools may reduce demand for some beginner tasks. They are told the future is full of opportunity, but the path into that future feels less clear than it used to.
The anxiety is not irrational. It's not just young people being pessimistic or scared of technology.
It's a rational response to a confusing transition, because every serious profession still needs beginners. The problem is that beginners are inefficient by design. They require training, feedback, supervision, repetition, and time. If companies begin treating that inefficiency only as waste, AI gives them a way to remove the very work that once created future expertise. And that is dangerous, because an economy cannot depend only on senior judgment while quietly weakening the pipeline that produces it.
And that's the paradox. Companies still need experienced people, but if they stop creating beginners, where do the experienced people come from later?
That is why the first rung matters. It was never the destination, it was the beginning of formation. If AI takes over the low-level work without replacing the learning function, then the future does not become more efficient in any complete sense. It becomes harder to enter. The real issue is not whether junior work was glamorous. It was not. The issue is that junior work was where people learned how to notice, revise, make mistakes, ask better questions, understand context, and slowly become trustworthy.
So today on Toronto Talks, the vanishing first rung.
And the question that will define the next generation of work. If AI changes the bottom of the ladder, how will beginners learn to climb?
Before we blame everything on AI, we probably have to slow down a little. Because the entry-level job market was already under pressure. Remote work changing training, higher rates changing hiring, tech overhiring had to unwind. So if we make this too simple, we're going to get it wrong.
That's why this segment matters. The first rung may be weakening, but not because of one single force. AI is part of the story, but it is not the entire story. Entry-level work is being squeezed by several pressures at once. Slower white-collar hiring, weaker graduate labour market conditions, reduced employer appetite for training, remote and hybrid onboarding challenges, post-pandemic hiring corrections, credential inflation, and now AI. The danger is not that AI explains everything. The danger is that AI arrives at the exact moment the first rung is already fragile and gives companies one more reason to skip, compress, or redesign the bottom of the ladder.
Right. So the real story isn't AI killed entry-level work. It's more like the ladder was already wobbling and now AI is putting more weight on it.
I think that's a cleaner and more defensible claim. If we overstate the AI story, we weaken the episode because the evidence is mixed. Some research suggests young workers in AI-exposed occupations are under pressure, but other research complicates that by showing broader hiring weakness, including patterns that predate the full generative AI boom. So the responsible version of the argument is not that AI alone is eliminating junior work. It is that AI is changing the recovery path for junior work. In previous slowdowns, companies eventually hired beginners again when conditions improved. This time, some of the work that justified beginner hiring may be redesigned before that rebound fully arrives.
All right, Sophie, let's unpack that a bit. What's the clearest evidence that we should be careful about simply putting all the blame on AI?
One important piece comes from the New York Fed. Their analysis of job postings found no clear divergence between junior and senior demand inside highly AI-exposed occupations. In other words, postings for junior roles did not obviously collapse relative to senior roles in the way a simple AI is targeting entry-level workers story would predict. That matters because it tells us the labour market signal is not clean. If both junior and senior postings are weakening in similar occupations, then some of what we are seeing may reflect broader employer caution, slower demand, macro pressure, or industry adjustment, not only AI replacing junior tasks.
Yeah, that's useful because it keeps us from making the easy argument just because it sounds dramatic, right? But at the same time, it doesn't mean nothing is happening.
Exactly. Nuance is not denial. The New York Fed finding complicates the AI-only story, but it does not erase the first rung concern. The Dallas Fed analysis still found employment pressure among young workers in highly AI-exposed occupations, and the San Francisco Fed's republication at work adds a key detail. The decline appears to be driven less by mass layoffs and more by fewer young people moving directly from outside the workforce into employment. That is very important for this episode. The problem may not look like a wave of young workers being fired. It may look like fewer young workers being invited in, which makes the problem harder to see. Layoffs create headlines. Missing opportunities do not. If a company decides not to hire the junior analyst, not to replace the coordinator, not to expand the graduate program, or not to add another support role, there may be no public announcement. But for the person trying to enter the field, the effect is real. The first rung becomes harder to find. And because that pressure is mixed with several other forces, young workers can feel the consequences even while experts debate the cause.
Right, so let's talk about those other forces. Remote work seems to be a big one. How does that connect to the first rung problem?
Remote work changed the economics of training beginners. Experienced employees can often function well remotely because they already know the standards, the context, the unwritten rules, and the rhythm of professional work. Beginners need more observation, more feedback, more small corrections, more informal learning, and more exposure to how decisions actually get made. In an office, some of that happened almost accidentally. You overheard calls. You watched a senior person edit a document. You saw how someone handled a client. You learned what mattered by being near the work. Remote work makes that harder, not impossible, but harder. And when training becomes harder, the entry-level hire can look more expensive and less immediately productive.
Right, because the junior person was never supposed to be efficient on day one. That was kind of the whole point. They needed the environment around them.
That's right. Beginners are inefficient by design. They are not failed senior workers. They are developing professionals. But if the surrounding environment no longer supports informal training as naturally, then companies may become more reluctant to hire them. Recent research reported by Business Insider argues that work from home potential may be a stronger predictor of weakened junior hiring than AI exposure alone. That does not mean remote work is bad. It means that hybrid and remote organizations have to rebuild apprenticeship intentionally. If they do not, the first rung weakens because the learning environment thins out.
Yeah, that's actually a really important point. I mean, obviously a lot of people really like remote work, but the person who already knows the job and the person trying to learn the job are not experiencing it the same way.
Yes, remote work can be liberating for experienced workers and isolating for beginners at the same time. That is the tension. For a senior person, fewer interruptions may mean more focus. For a junior person, fewer interruptions may mean fewer chances to ask the small question before it becomes a big mistake. For a senior person, asynchronous work may feel efficient. For a junior person, it may remove the informal feedback loop that teaches judgment. So again, this is not about declaring remote work good or bad. It is about recognizing that the first rung depends on proximity, feedback, and repetition. And those things have to be designed differently now.
Okay, so remote work is one pressure, but what about the broader economy? I mean, clearly timing matters here, big time, right?
It does. The entry-level market has been affected by the post-pandemic hiring cycle. Many companies overhired during the low-rate, high-growth period, especially in technology and white-collar sectors. Then interest rates rose, capital became more expensive, budgets tightened, and firms became more cautious. When that happens, training-heavy roles are often vulnerable. A senior hire can look like an immediate productivity decision. A junior hire can look like a development investment, and when companies are anxious about cost, they often reduce investment before they reduce ambition.
Yeah, that's brutal, but it totally makes sense. The beginner becomes easier to postpone.
And postponement is one of the hidden enemies of career formation. A company does not need to announce that it no longer believes in junior talent. It simply delays the next cohort. It shrinks the internship class. It raises the experience requirement. It asks for AI skills earlier. It expects more readiness on arrival. Each decision may seem reasonable on its own, but together they change the path into the profession.
Right. And this is where AI comes back in the picture. Because if companies are already hesitant, then AI gives them a new reason to say, maybe we don't need that junior role just yet.
That's a key interaction. AI may not be the only cause, but it changes the decision calculus. If a senior employee with AI can handle more first-pass research, more code cleanup, more summaries, more draft language, more customer triage, or more analysis, then the company may delay hiring the person who used to do that work while learning from it. This is why AI matters, even if it is not the whole explanation. It does not have to be the original source of weakness in the first rung. It can still accelerate the redesign of that rung.
Right, so it's not really AI did this, it's more like AI showed up when the bottom of the ladder was already shaky.
Yeah, and that is much stronger than a simple blame story. The first rung is being weakened by a combination of forces. Remote work reduced informal learning. The macro environment reduced hiring appetite. Overhiring corrections reduced entry-level openings. AI compressed some beginner tasks. Employer expectations rose. Education has not always kept up, and young workers are left trying to enter a system that increasingly wants them to be both inexperienced and immediately useful. Because entry-level work used to contain an implicit promise. We know you are not fully formed yet, but we will give you work that forms you. That promise is becoming less stable. And if companies no longer want to carry the cost of formation, then we should be honest about what is being lost. Not just a job posting, not just a title, a developmental pathway.
I guess we shouldn't blame everything on AI, but we also shouldn't pretend AI isn't changing the equation, right?
Exactly. The right question is not, did AI single-handedly destroy entry-level work? The right question is, how does AI interact with an already fragile first rung? Because that is where the real risk lives. If companies are already reluctant to train and remote work already makes apprenticeship harder and budgets already favor immediate productivity, then AI can become the tool that makes skipping the beginner feel rational.
And that takes us into the next part of this episode. Because if the first rung is being compressed, we have to ask what that rung was actually doing in the first place.
Because the old junior work was not just cheap output. It was supervised repetition. It was correction. It was pattern recognition. It was the slow formation of professional judgment. And if AI removes the task without replacing the learning function, the organization may become faster today while weakening the talent pipeline it will need tomorrow.
High-interest debt can feel like a trap. With Volo, you can break free. Just choose how much you need. Set the terms that work for you Share your story and send the request to people you trust. Your network sees it instantly, and you're on your way. Borrow with confidence at fair rates from people who believe in you. Join the waitlist today at voloapp.ca.
A lot of junior work looks pretty replaceable when you only look at the output. The first draft, the first summary, the first spreadsheet, the first ticket. But that work was doing something to the person doing it.
Exactly. The output may have been basic, but the formation was not. Junior work taught people how to notice, how to revise, how to be corrected, how to understand context, and how to build judgment through repetition. That is the part that gets missed when we talk about AI only in terms of speed or efficiency. A first draft is not only a document. A simple ticket is not only a task. A rough spreadsheet is not only a file. For a beginner, those are practice fields. They are places where you learn what matters, what does not, where mistakes hide, how standards are applied, and how senior people think. So the mistake is looking at the task and forgetting what the task was teaching. A lot of early career work had two functions. It created some value for the organization, but it also trained the person doing it. And those two functions were linked. A junior analyst did not become better by reading a handbook about analysis. They became better by doing research, getting corrected, rebuilding the slide, seeing what the manager changed, and slowly learning the difference between information and insight. A junior lawyer did not learn legal judgment only by studying doctrine. They learned by reviewing documents, comparing language, drafting memos, and watching how senior lawyers framed risk. A junior developer learned through bugs, tests, small features, documentation, and code review. The work was often boring, but the repetition mattered.
All right, Sophie, let's dig into that a little bit. What did first pass work actually teach people that we might be underestimating?
It taught pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is one of the foundations of professional judgment. Beginners need exposure to lots of examples before they can recognize what matters. They need to see the normal case, the strange case, the sloppy draft, the missing detail, the client expectation, the hidden risk, the edge condition. AI can generate a polished first pass, but that does not mean the beginner has built the internal library that lets them evaluate it. That is the concern. If AI handles too much of the first pass work before the junior has developed taste, the junior may see the answer without understanding how to judge the answer.
Yeah, that's the scary part. The work can look polished before the person actually knows what good work even looks like.
That distinction matters across almost every professional field. In marketing, AI can generate 20 headlines, 10 captions, and 5 campaign angles in seconds. That is useful. But a junior marketer still needs to learn why one line lands and another feels cheap. In consulting or finance, AI can summarize a market and draft a slide structure, but a junior still needs to learn what a client actually needs to know, which number changes the recommendation, and which chart is just decoration. In software, AI can write boilerplate or suggest code, but a junior still needs to understand the code base, the trade-offs, and the consequences of a bad abstraction. The risk is not that AI creates output. The risk is that it creates output faster than beginners develop the judgment to inspect it.
Right. So in a weird way, the better the tool gets, the easier it is for a beginner to skip the messy part where they were supposed to learn.
Yes. And the messy part was often where learning happened. Making the bad first draft taught you why the better version was better. Struggling with the spreadsheet taught you where the assumptions were hiding. Handling the simple customer ticket taught you how customers actually talk, what frustrates them, and what the product does in real life. Writing the first research summary taught you what you did not understand. These tasks were not sacred. Some were inefficient, some were tedious, some were poorly designed. But if we remove them entirely, we have to ask what replaces the developmental function they served.
Yeah, that feels like an important correction. It's not like we're trying to defend busy work just because it existed.
No, and we should be very clear about that. Some junior work was exploitative. Some of it was gatekeeping. Some of it wasted people's time under the excuse of paying dues. The point is not to preserve pointless suffering or inefficient rituals. The point is to preserve formation. If AI removes the low-value version of the task, that can be good. But then leaders have to design a better learning pathway. They cannot simply say, AI can do the task, so no beginner needs to learn through it. That is the leap that becomes dangerous.
Yeah, because every profession still needs people coming up. You can't just have seniors forever.
It's the junior worker paradox. Companies still need senior judgment, but senior judgment does not appear by accident. It is built through lower stakes exposure, correction, repetition, mentorship, and responsibility that increases over time. If organizations cut too much of the beginner layer, they may look more efficient in the short term, but over time, they weaken the pipeline that produces the very judgment they still depend on. The WEF's early careers work frames this directly. Entry-level jobs have long been the foundation of future talent pipelines, and AI is now changing those jobs through the eyes of the workers entering them.
Got it. So basically, the company might save time now, but create a talent problem later, right?
Yes, and the problem may not show up immediately. In the short term, AI-assisted senior employees can absorb more work. They can produce faster drafts, review more material, handle more analysis, and reduce the need for junior support. That can look like efficiency. But 5 or 10 years later, the organization may ask why fewer people are ready to lead, interpret, manage clients, make judgment calls, or train the next cohort. The answer may be that the organization removed the training ground and called it productivity.
Yeah, that line hits. Removed the training ground and called it productivity. So, where are you seeing this most clearly?
We can see it in several lanes. In law, the first rung often involved document review, legal research, contract comparison, and memo drafting. AI can assist with all of that. But those tasks taught issue spotting, precision, precedent, and risk framing. In software development, junior tickets, bug fixes, documentation, tests, and QA work taught code-based familiarity and debugging instincts. AI coding tools can accelerate that work, but acceleration does not automatically teach architectural judgment. In consulting and finance, the slide deck was not just the deliverable, it was the training ground. It taught synthesis, commercial logic, attention to detail, and how to structure a recommendation. In customer support, even simple tickets taught product knowledge, customer empathy, diagnosis, and communication under pressure.
Yeah, and that's such a different way of seeing it. Because from the outside, a simple ticket is just a simple ticket, but for the person starting out, it's like reps in the gym.
That is a good way to put it. The task may be small, but the repetition builds capacity, and beginners need repetition before they can be trusted with complexity. The danger is asking young workers to supervise AI outputs before they have enough experience to know what good looks like. That can create a strange kind of premature elevation. A junior may look more capable because the tool makes the output cleaner, but underneath that output, the judgment may not have fully formed yet.
Right, so they might look ready before they actually are.
Yes, and that is both the opportunity and the risk. If AI is used well, it can help juniors learn faster. It can explain mistakes, compare versions, show examples, and give feedback. But if it is used poorly, it becomes a shortcut around the very process that builds competence. And the labour market is already moving in that direction. NACE reported that more than 1/3 of entry-level jobs now require AI skills, and nearly 60% of employers say interns are being assigned projects involving AI tools and skills. That means young workers are not only entering jobs after AI, they are entering jobs through AI.
Yeah, that's a lot to put on someone just starting out. It's like they're expected to use the advanced tool before they've even learned the basics.
And that does not mean young workers cannot do it. Many will adapt quickly, but adaptation is not the same as formation. If we want AI to become part of apprenticeship, then schools and companies have to teach people how to question outputs, verify sources, compare alternatives, explain their reasoning, and understand the underlying domain deeply enough to know when the tool is wrong. Otherwise, we risk producing workers who can generate impressive output, but struggle to defend, revise, or understand it under pressure.
So the issue isn't whether AI belongs in junior work. It's whether junior work still teaches people while AI is there.
That is exactly the question. AI should not be treated as the enemy of learning, but it also should not be treated as a replacement for learning. The goal is not to keep every old task intact. The goal is to keep the ladder intact. If AI removes the boring part, the repetitive part, or the first pass part, then someone has to ask, where does the beginner now practice? Where do they receive correction? Where do they learn standards? Where do they make small mistakes before the stakes are high? Where do they build the judgment that one day makes them senior?
And that brings us to the next part, because there is a more hopeful version of this, right? AI could actually become part of a new training layer.
It could. And that is why the next question is not whether we can preserve the old first rung exactly as it was. We probably cannot, and in some cases we should not. The better question is whether AI becomes a coach, a simulator, and a feedback partner, or whether it becomes a crutch that helps beginners skip the work that would have formed them. The first rung was never the destination. But if it changes, we still have to build a way for people to climb.
Your money can do more than sit in a savings account. Browse real requests from your trusted network. See the repayment plan and the return. Fund it in seconds and start earning passive income. Lend with purpose. Put your money to work right where it matters. Join the waitlist today at voloapp.ca.
Despite everything we've talked about so far, there is a more hopeful version of this story. AI does not have to remove the first rung. It could instead become part of a new first rung.
Yes, and that is important because this episode should not become nostalgia for an older system that was often inefficient, unequal, and frustrating. The old first rung taught people, but it also wasted time, rewarded proximity, and sometimes dressed up poor training as paying dues. AI gives us a chance to redesign that. It can explain unfamiliar concepts, it can generate examples, it can give feedback, it can simulate conversations, it can help a beginner compare drafts, test assumptions, review code, practice judgment, and move through early confusion with more support than many young workers ever received before.
So the positive case is real. AI could actually make the learning curve less brutal.
It could, and we should take that seriously. Stanford's 2025 A Index points to a growing body of research showing that AI can boost productivity and, in many cases, narrow skill gaps. That matters for beginners because the early career gap is often a confidence gap, a context gap, and a feedback gap. A junior person may not know what question to ask. They may not want to interrupt a senior colleague again. They may not have enough examples to compare against. AI can provide a first layer of support. It can say, here is what this term means, here is why this draft is unclear, here are 3 ways to structure this argument, here are the likely issues in this code. Used that way, AI can become a tutor.
All right, Sophie, what does it look like when AI is actually helping someone learn, not just helping them finish faster?
The difference is whether the tool explains the work or merely completes it. If a junior analyst asks AI to summarize a market report and pastes the answer into a deck, that may save time, but it does not necessarily build skill. But if that same analyst asks, what are the 3 strongest assumptions in this report? What evidence supports them? What would a skeptical client challenge? How would I explain this to a CFO? Then AI becomes part of the learning process. The same is true in writing. AI can produce a polished paragraph and compare 2 drafts and explain why one is stronger. In coding, it can generate a function, or it can walk through the bug and explain why the fix works. The tool becomes educational when it makes the invisible reasoning visible.
Right, that makes sense. So it's less about whether AI gives you the answer and more about whether it helps you understand the answer.
That's the line between coach and shortcut. A coach strengthens the person. A shortcut simply produces the result. In early career work, that difference is everything. If AI helps a beginner see structure, test reasoning, compare alternatives, and understand why something works, it can accelerate formation. But if it only helps them submit cleaner output, it may hide the fact that the underlying judgment has not developed yet.
Yeah, and that connects to what we discussed earlier, that the work can look polished before the person actually learns what good work looks like.
And that is the danger of premature polish. A young worker can now generate language that sounds professional, code that appears functional, analysis that looks structured, or a presentation that feels finished. But professional growth is not just about producing something that looks finished. It is about understanding why it works, what it leaves out, where it could fail, and how to defend it under pressure. If AI allows people to skip too many of those internal steps, they may look ready before they actually are.
So how should companies think about this? Because obviously they want juniors to use the tool, but they also don't want fake competence.
Companies need to design AI-assisted apprenticeship deliberately. That means giving juniors assignments where the goal is not only the final output, but the reasoning behind it. A junior should be asked to show the prompt, critique the AI output, identify what they changed, explain what they verified, and describe what they still do not know. Managers should review not just the deliverable, but the learning process. If the task is a research summary, the junior should explain which sources were reliable and which claims were weak. If it is code, they should explain why the solution works and where it might break. If it is marketing copy, they should explain the audience, tone, and trade-offs. That is how AI becomes training rather than camouflage.
That's good, because otherwise you're just grading the finished thing. And the finished thing might be doing a lot of hiding.
Exactly. AI makes it easier to confuse output with competence, and that creates risk for both the worker and the organization. The worker may not receive the feedback they actually need. The manager may assume the junior understands more than they do. The organization may promote speed while weakening depth. So the better approach is to make the learning visible. Ask juniors to annotate their process. Ask them what AI got wrong. Ask what they accepted, what they rejected, and why. Ask them to produce a human judgment layer on top of the machine output.
And what about schools? Because this can't just be an employer problem. Students are already using these tools before they even get to the job.
Schools have a major role here. Treating AI only as a cheating problem is too narrow. Academic integrity matters, but if schools stop there, they miss the bigger responsibility. Students need to learn how to use AI as a professional tool without surrendering their own judgment. That means assignments should sometimes require students to document their process, compare AI outputs, verify claims, explain revisions, and show where their own reasoning entered the work. The goal should not be to pretend AI does not exist. The goal should be to teach students how to remain intellectually responsible while using it.
Yeah, because banning it completely might make sense in some situations, but as a long-term strategy, it feels like you're training people for a workplace that no longer exists.
That is the challenge. There are moments where restricting AI use is appropriate, especially when the purpose is to practice a foundational skill. But if every assignment becomes an AI ban, students may leave school unprepared for the tools they will be expected to use. And if every assignment becomes AI allowed without structure, they may leave school without the underlying discipline. The better question is, what skill is this assignment trying to build? Sometimes the answer requires no AI. Sometimes it requires AI with full transparency. Sometimes it requires students to critique AI directly. The policy should follow the learning objective.
That feels way more practical. Not AI or no AI, but what are we trying to teach here?
And that applies to companies too. Not every junior task should be optimized for speed. Some tasks should be protected because they build judgment. Others can be redesigned because AI removes waste. The point is to know the difference. If a junior never writes a first draft, they may not learn voice. If they never debug manually, they may not understand failure. If they never talk to a customer, they may not learn empathy. If they never build a messy spreadsheet, they may not learn where the assumptions live. AI can help with all of those things, but it should not erase the experience entirely.
AI can lower the barrier, but it can't replace the ladder.
Yes, that is the cleanest way to say it. AI can make knowledge more accessible. It can lower the cost of practice. It can give feedback when no one else is available. It can help a junior worker rehearse before a meeting, understand an unfamiliar concept, or test whether their thinking is coherent. And because AI skills are becoming economically valuable, PwC's 2025 AI Jobs Barometer reports a meaningful wage premium for workers with AI skills. Young people have every reason to learn these tools well. But AI fluency is not the same as professional maturity. The ladder still matters, the sequence still matters. Feedback still matters, responsibility still has to increase over time.
That's the balance, I think. We don't want young people avoiding AI, but we also don't want them using it in a way that skips their own development.
The goal is not to produce young workers who refuse AI. That would be unrealistic and unfair. The goal is to produce young workers who can use AI without being hollowed out by it. Workers who can ask better questions, verify answers, explain trade-offs, and eventually make judgments of their own. AI should help them climb. It should not carry them up so quickly that they never build the strength required to stand there.
And that brings us into the final segment. Because if AI is changing the first rung, then somebody has to actually rebuild the ladder.
Yes, the question now becomes practical. Companies, schools, and young workers all have a role. The old apprenticeship layer will not preserve itself automatically. If AI changes how beginners work, then we have to be just as intentional about how beginners learn. Because the first rung was never only about getting work done. It was about becoming the kind of person the work could eventually trust.
With Volo, lending and borrowing is effortless. No spreadsheets. No awkward follow-ups. Volo automates everything, from repayments to reminders, so your lending feels effortless. Every payment is tracked, updated, and secured, with encryption protecting every transaction. Automate with peace of mind. Volo protects what matters, so you can focus on what's next. Join the waitlist today at voloapp.ca.
If the first rung is changing, then the answer can't just be nostalgia. We can't tell companies to preserve old busy work forever, and we can't tell young people to pretend AI doesn't exist.
The question is not how to freeze the old ladder in place. Some parts of that ladder were inefficient, some were unfair, some were based more on proximity than talent, and some forced young workers to prove themselves through work that was tedious without being well designed. But the need for formation did not disappear. Every serious profession still has to answer the same question: how does a beginner become trustworthy? If AI changes the old path, then companies, schools, and young workers have to build a new one intentionally.
That feels like the key word, intentionally. Because if we just let the market figure it out by accident, the beginner is probably the one who gets squeezed.
Yes, and the scale of change makes that even more urgent. The World Economic Forum projects that labour market shifts could create 170 million roles and displace 92 million by 2030, for a net increase of 78 million jobs. That is not a simple collapse story, but it is a massive transition story. WEF also reports that half of employers plan to reorient their business in response to AI, 2/3 plan to hire talent with AI-specific skills, and 40% expect to reduce workforce where AI can automate tasks. So the ladder is not standing still. The question is whether institutions redesign the path into work with the same seriousness that they redesign the work itself.
So let's make it practical. What should companies actually do differently?
Companies have to stop treating junior work only as cheap output. If a task helped someone learn, then removing the task means replacing the learning pathway. That might mean redesigning junior roles around supervised AI use, where beginners are not simply asked to generate output, but to explain, verify, critique, and improve AI outputs. It means preserving feedback loops with senior people. It means assigning work in stages, so juniors move from observing to drafting to revising to defending their reasoning to handling higher stakes responsibility over time. It also means keeping junior hiring alive, even when AI makes it tempting to postpone. A company that stops creating beginners may eventually run out of people ready to become seniors.
Yeah, because AI can do this task is not the same thing as no human needs to learn this task.
That distinction should become a leadership rule. Some tasks can be automated completely. Some can be AI assisted. Some should be protected as practice because they build judgment. Leaders need to know the difference. If a junior never writes a first draft, they may not learn voice. If they never debug manually, they may not understand failure. If they never talk to a customer, they may not build empathy. If they never build a messy model, they may not learn where the assumptions hide. AI can improve all of those processes, but it should not erase the human learning inside them.
And schools have to make some changes too, right? Because students are already walking into this workplace, ready or not.
They do. Schools cannot treat AI only as a cheating problem. That is too narrow for the world students are entering. They need to teach AI as a professional tool, but with standards. Students should learn how to show process, cite sources, verify claims, compare outputs, explain revisions, and identify where their own judgment entered the work. Some assignments should restrict AI because the point is to practice the underlying skill. Other assignments should require AI because the point is to learn how to use it responsibly. The goal is not blanket permission or blanket prohibition. The goal is alignment between the tool and the learning objective.
Yeah, that's a much better way to think about it. Not AI or no AI, but what skills are we trying to build?
That question matters because employer expectations are rising quickly. NACE reported that more than 1/3 of entry-level jobs now require AI skills, nearly triple the share from fall 2025, and nearly 60% of employers say interns are assigned projects involving AI tools and skills. That means the education to work transition is already being reshaped. Schools that ignore AI leave students underprepared. Schools that allow AI without discipline may leave students underformed. The middle path is more demanding. Teach the tool while preserving the mind that uses it.
And what about young workers themselves? Because some of this is on companies and schools, but if you're the person trying to break in, you still need a strategy.
Young workers should use AI to learn, not only to finish. That means asking the tool to explain concepts, challenge assumptions, test understanding, generate practice questions, compare versions, and point out weaknesses. It means building the habit of verification. It means learning the underlying domain deeply enough to know when the model is wrong. And it means building a portfolio of judgment, not just output. The worker who can show their thinking, explain their process, and use AI responsibly will be much harder to dismiss as merely AI-assisted.
So don't just use AI to look ready, use it to actually get ready.
That is the personal version of the new apprenticeship. AI can make someone look more capable before they are fully formed, but it can also help them become more capable if they use it correctly. The difference is whether the tool becomes a mask or a mirror. A mask hides what you do not know. A mirror shows you where you still need to grow. Young workers should push AI to expose gaps, not just cover them.
That's good, because the goal is not to be anti-AI. It's to make sure people still become genuinely good at something.
And that is the heart of the episode. The first rung was never the destination. It was the place where people learned how to climb. If AI removes that rung without replacing its function, the future does not become more efficient, it becomes harder to enter. But if leaders redesign apprenticeship deliberately, if companies preserve mentorship alongside automation, if schools teach judgment alongside tools, and if young workers use AI to deepen rather than bypass their learning, then the first rung does not have to vanish. It can be rebuilt.
So the question is not whether AI changes the career ladder. It already is. The question is whether or not we build a new way in.
Every generation needs a way to become useful before it becomes expert. Every profession needs people who are allowed to be beginners before they are expected to be fully formed. And every serious organization has to decide whether it only wants immediate output or whether it is willing to invest in future judgment. Because when the first rung disappears, the future does not become more efficient, it becomes harder to enter. And the question that remains is simple. If AI changes the work people use to learn from, will we rebuild the ladder or leave the next generation reaching for a first step that is no longer there?
That's it for the show. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and reach out to us anytime at talk@torontotalks.ca. We'll see you next time right here on Toronto Talks, where big ideas come to life
and curiosity never sleeps.